Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Manya Chylinski. In my regular life, I am a writer and marketer and market research consultant, but I'm talking to you today about my experience as a survivor of the Boston Marathon bombing. We're going to look at... Sure, how's that? Is that better? Okay. Okay, better? All right, thank you. My name is Manya Chylinski. I'm going to share with you sort of what happened in the bombing and my experience. We're going to talk about the aftermath, and then we're going to look at how we can help people going forward, because the next time something like this happens. So, I'm used to be a huge fan of the marathon. I live in the neighborhood, and finish is only a few blocks away, and it's this 26-mile-long party that ends in Copley Square in Boston. And it happens on Patriots Day, which is the third Monday in April. And that's a holiday in Massachusetts, so a lot of people get it off. And I was the biggest fan. At the finish line, I took my responsibility very seriously, cheering people on, clapping, and wherever I was always within a block of the finish line. So, you know, saying things like, "You did it. You're almost there. Just a few more steps. Congratulations. Way to go." And a lot of people put their names on their shirts, and I would be screaming your name as you go by. You know, "Way to go, Tony. You did it." I loved it. So in 2013, my friend got us tickets for the bleacher seats. They were good for 2 o'clock on. So that morning, I did my normal thing. I was on the north side of Boylston Street, which in this picture is where the blue tents are. I was about a block down, and standing there cheering on the elite runners who came in to finish. And if you've ever had a chance to see elite runners, you know how amazing it is. The woman who won the race that year, I would have sworn to you that she had just started running around the corner because she looked so relaxed. I am not a runner. That's not how I would look after 26 miles. That's not how I would look after about 26 feet. So I did my normal thing in the morning, and then my friends and I got ready to come to the bleacher seats. And I took this picture to post on Facebook and show everybody how excited I was to be in the bleacher seats. The finish line is that yellow line that you see in the photo there. And it's really loud at the finish line. There's a guy in one of those blue tents there, and he's announcing everybody as they come across the finish line. Everybody's got those chips, and so they know who people are. You either qualify to run the marathon as a runner, or you raise money for an approved charity, and you can get a bib for that. So there's a wide range of runners who are running, and it's loud, and people are cheering, and we're all standing on the bleacher seats. I had been under the misunderstanding that you actually got to sit to watch everybody finish, but you don't. And if you have a job where you stand, you know how exhausting it is to stand for several hours. And I also know how ridiculous it is to say I was exhausted watching people who just run 26 miles to pass me. But there you go. So this is where I was standing at 2:49 p.m. when a bomb goes off. So I'm standing there, I'm looking straight ahead, I'm watching the course. I don't remember if I'm cheering or just in one of those quiet moments. And directly across the street from me, a bomb explodes. And the smoke gets bigger, and it's rising, and it's gray, black, dirty smoke. And I see the people running away, people on the sidewalk on the other side of the street, just sort of running away in waves. And I'm frozen in place, and the whole world ceases to exist for me except for my tunnel vision directly across the street. I can't feel anything. I can't see anything else. I don't see any other people. I can't hear anything. I'm just staring at this spot. And I don't know how I knew this, but I knew it was a bomb. Later, I heard from other people who, in the initial moments, thought something completely different. But in that moment, I know it's a bomb. And I think to myself, they just ruined the Boston Marathon. And as I'm staring at it, I catch sight of a woman who's standing in front of what used to be a plate glass window. It's completely shattered. There's glass at her feet. And there's little bits of glass clinging around the edges. And it's framing her. And I cannot get my head around, how is this woman standing right here where a bomb just went off? And as I'm trying to figure that out, the second bomb goes off. And I turn, and I see the smoke rising up in front of the building, and I'm overwhelmed with a feeling of just not knowing where I am and what this place is. This is my neighborhood. Boylston Street is the major commercial street in this neighborhood. So if you live there, you are on or walking across this street practically every day of your life. I know it as well as I know any part of the city. And as I was looking down the street, seeing that smoke rising, I just had the feeling that I just didn't even know where I was. And I thought to myself, we have to get out of here. And it turns out I said that, we have to get out of here. I had turned to my friend and said, we have to. So I exited the bleachers by walking over all the seats in front of me. I didn't go down the aisle and down the stairs. And so to do that, I looked down at my feet to make sure I wasn't going to trip over the seats or purses or whatever it was. And from that moment on, I never looked back up. That took us closer to the bombing site, and for a little bit we were walking sort of next to the bombing site, and I never looked back. We made it around the corner to the front of the Boston Public Library, and my friend and I realized that we were missing our other friends, so we stopped to wait for them. And that's when I realized I was sobbing. And that was the first of many, many bouts like that. A couple days later, I was watching CNN, and to my horror, saw myself on the news. Turns out a man who was next to me, a couple feet away from me, started filming right after the first bomb went off.
Just go slow! Take your time!
That's about as close as you can get to seeing what it was like from my perspective. Some of you may have noticed there were several police officers on the course. They are always and have always been stationed along the course for the stretch for the finish line. And some of you may have noticed right at the end, so this video is about a minute long, goes about 40 or 50 seconds after the second bomb went off. At the end of this video, just before this part right here, some of you may have noticed somebody's already at this bombing site with a stretcher. That's because there is a medical tent just past the finish line, and just past the finish line they're waiting with wheelchairs and stretchers. So there was a lot of medical help, obviously, that was available pretty quickly. So after this happened, I evacuated, I went home. I had no idea really what had just happened. I mean, intellectually, yes, I could have told you, bomb just went off. By the time we got home, we knew that a few people had been killed. We kind of had a sense of it. But I didn't really have any idea what was happening to me and how it affected me. And in the week afterwards, especially that first week, I was really struggling. I couldn't sleep. When I slept, I would have nightmares. I was having intrusive thoughts and sort of like flashbacks. I couldn't eat. I couldn't take care of myself. I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't work. I work for myself and I work from home. So I didn't go into an office and have a community of people who were able to support me. So I know now how much that really impacted my trajectory. But as I was dealing with all of this stuff, I was looking to find out about this on the news. I was looking to see stories about other people feeling this way. And that's not the story we told after the Boston bombing. It's not the story we tell after most of these events. We talk about the people who died. We talk about the people who were physically injured. And in Boston, there were some very catastrophic physical injuries. And those were the focus of the stories. We just weren't talking about the psychological piece of it. And I felt like there's just something wrong with me, because obviously if they're not talking about it, that means nobody's feeling this way. And some college kids started the hashtag Boston Strong and turned into t-shirts, and we've seen that in many events since. It's a big rallying cry, and I hate it. I hated it then and I hate it now. I understand where it comes from, and I understand that it comes from a place of wanting to be very helpful, and probably some people did find it useful. I found it just very isolating. I found it kind of I read it as everybody else is Boston Strong and I'm not. Now, intellectually now, I realize that's not true at all, but that's how it came across to me in the moments and days and weeks afterwards, that all of these people are rallying together and they're strong and they're dealing with this, and what's wrong with me that I can't deal with this and I can't just shake it off? Well, when we have an event like this, that middle circle is really obvious to everybody. We know the people who were killed. We know how to deal with the people who were physically injured. Those are the no-brainers when we're talking about dealing with these kind of events. But as we get farther out on this circle, people are still affected, but we just aren't doing a great job of talking about them. So whether it's a witness like myself who was standing right there when it happened, or a family member, or in the case of Boston, many people who were around the corner or kind of on the edges who heard the bombs and then saw crowds of people running away from them past where this person was standing. That's terrifying, and these people were impacted. My neighborhood was impacted. People who weren't even home that day were traumatized knowing that a bomb went off in their neighborhood. And the crime scene was closed for several days, so that impacted people as well. So, part of why I started talking about this is to make all of these people visible, make all of these layers visible after an event like this. And I haven't even talked about first responders, hospital personnel, all of the people who are providing services, who are now exposed to the trauma in some way. I know an EMT who I've met since the day, who was working that day and spent 5 hours in the medical tent afterward triaging the wounded, thinking another bomb was going to go off, but still there doing his job. And so these are the stories we don't really hear on the news, and that are in general, our mayors and governors and aren't really talking about. And these are the stories I want us to be talking about, because we all have some level of distress after experiencing an event like this. These are the kind of things that you feel. It's completely normal. I didn't know it was normal, and we don't talk about it in the press, certainly, as something that is normal to experience. If you're a witness to an event, somehow your job is to tell what happened to the people who were physically injured. It isn't about what happened to you and how are you feeling. And, this is something that we all experience. This isn't something that we all carry with us forever. We all have different levels of resiliency based on life experience, based on past traumas, our social support network, our faith, the community where we live, our socioeconomic status. Think about all of those things. They all play into how you are able to deal with things like this. And for some people, it kind of turns into a little bit longer-term post-traumatic stress. Now, it's not uncommon to have these kind of symptoms after an event like a bombing or a school shooting or even a natural disaster, something like this. But to get a diagnosable mental health condition it's not as common. It's only about Between 10 and 25% of civilians at an event like this are going to come away and eventually have PTSD. About 40% of trauma surgeons have symptoms of PTSD, and about a third of first responders will have diagnosable depression or PTSD after something like this. But to get a diagnosable condition, you have to have, for PTSD in particular, you have to have at least one of the symptoms from each of these 4 categories. They have to last for longer than a month, and they have to really be negatively impacting your life. But I think you can see it's possible to have a lot of these symptoms and maybe not quite be diagnosable, whether you see a therapist about it or not. And there are a lot of sub-threshold injuries, mental health injuries that people are dealing with. And 3 to 5 years after an event like this, the mental health community is ready for things like divorce and job loss, and they see lots of substance abuse and eating disorders, and that can at least in part be attributed to somebody's experience at a trauma like this because they weren't really able to work through it. It's about 4 to 6 weeks after an event, mental health professionals know this, that is kind of the dividing line, where if you've got symptoms, you're going to start to be able to deal with them and integrate into your life and kind of move on, or they're going to settle in deeper and they're going to present some long-term problems. So those first few weeks are really important to be communicating about the mental health injuries and helping people understand their experience. Now, when we look at an event like this, if you look at mass violence in particular, or a natural disaster, the mental health community knows that for every 1 physical injury, you can expect between 4 and 50 psychological injuries. So that's huge. That makes the impact of these kind of events even larger than we're talking about in the TV news. And I want to talk about what I think are some ways that we can help going forward. So in the immediate response, there are opportunities to help people understand that what they're experiencing is normal and to validate that experience. Whether it's psychological first aid or, as simple as something like, so I kept looking at the news and the press conferences, and when the police chief would come on and the mayor would come on, and I was looking to see number of people killed, number of people physically injured, like actually say the word physically injured, and then the number of people who were potentially, psychologically wounded because of their proximity to the event. And proximity isn't even the only determinant, but if we could start talking about it that way, I kept looking to see if anybody was talking about the psychological impacts. And it turns out that we tend to believe the first thing we hear about something, even when more facts come later that completely contradict what you first believe. In an event like this, it's harder to get past that first thing that you believe. So if we have an opportunity to immediately be talking about the mental health impacts and helping people understand that, this is where I want to see that. Now, I want to see psychological first aid, but I know that isn't always feasible, and I know that as first responders and first receivers, there's a lot of other things that you need to be doing. In Boston, for example, people like me were just in the way. There were 2 bombs. Why weren't there 3 or 4 or more? But once there was more than 1, nobody knew how many there were going to be. So on one hand, as first responders, you want to get us out of there to protect us. Secondly, if you're triaging people with physical injuries, you want the people who you don't need to be dealing with to kind of get out of the way so you can deal with the triage, which is critically important. In Boston, we knew pretty quickly this was a crime. This wasn't some sort of accident. So at some point, somebody's starting to think about, okay, this is a crime scene and we have to secure this crime scene and we have to protect the evidence. So all of that speaks to just get people like me out of the way quickly. And for those of you who were there last night and saw the presentation about the Las Vegas shooting, he showed a video, or sort of I'm not sure if it was a video or a graphic, but showing sort of the concert venue and all the people, and then all of the ways they disperse just in every single direction. So, obviously psychological first aid is not going to be easy in that case because people aren't filing right past you and you can kind of pull people off and say, I'm going to help you, I'm going to help you. But whenever possible, I would like to see us be, helping people in that way. And, the recovery phase, which starts a couple months in, is particularly difficult as a survivor. And if you've experienced any kind of post-traumatic stress, you may feel the same way. But you start to watch people getting better. And you see the news stories about the people getting better. And in Boston, some of the folks with very serious physical wounds, were, it was a very difficult process for a lot of them, but we started to see them really getting up and walking and getting back to their lives. And I know it wasn't that simple, but from my perspective, you thought, okay, great, all these people are moving on, and I can't get past it. What's wrong with me still? It's a few weeks later, I can't get better. I have my legs, I can still walk, I'm alive. Why aren't I grateful for that? Why do I feel the way that I feel? So when we're looking at a few months out to a year, that's an opportunity to once again remind people how normal it is to have these feelings and help them understand they can find support. And that most people don't get a diagnosable mental health condition, and it's just support. That support doesn't have to be a therapist or a psychiatrist. It can be a clergy member. It can be a family member. It can be your peer support group. Anything that gets you support helps you deal with these symptoms and kind of integrate them into your life. And then long-term recovery, I actually call preparedness for the next event, because we all know that something's going to happen somewhere. And if we can, once again, help people understand that feeling distressed and feeling traumatized is valid, and we can help them understand that, they have the capability to heal. We're going to help people for the long term. So that's, in the long-term aftermath of an event and in preparation for the next event, talking about this, continuing to talk about this. Because what we're really talking about here is the stigma of mental health. Mental health is just health, but we have divided it into physical health and mental health. They're the opposite sides of the same coin, but we still tend to think of them as very different, and we tend to not care so much for the mental health side, and we don't have any time to get into why that is, but that's a real thing, and it's a real thing as a survivor too, feeling like, well, I don't count because mental health injuries don't count, kind of that stigma in myself. So I really want to see us, resiliency. I skipped a slide in my head. We're all resilient. I never thought I was resilient after this happened, and I hated that word, and I actually still kind of hate it a little bit, because I would see people who were much more resilient than I, and I was jealous. I know someone who a few weeks later legitimately just kind of brushed the whole thing off and was fine, and is absolutely fine. Whereas I got worse, and I ended up getting diagnosed with PTSD. So I'm obviously not resilient. But we all have some level of resiliency. We all have something in one of those 5 buckets. And it's just a matter of helping people understand that they can draw on whatever that piece of resiliency is. So understand that what's happening to you is real, and you're going to get better. And if you can't get better on your own, you can get help. But you do have the skills to help get yourself better. So I want to see us really, after events like this, talking about these things, talking about emotional trauma, saying it, having it on the news, making sure we talk about physical injuries and non-physical injuries, or physical injuries and psychological injuries, that we're counting that so that people who experience understand and don't feel invisible the way that I did after this event. And, as these things work, it's been 6 years, I still feel invisible in the way that the city deals with survivors. I am invisible, essentially, to the city still. And it's incredibly frustrating. So I stand in front of you to say, let's not do that to the next group of people who have to deal with something like this. So that's my message. We have a couple minutes left for questions. And I've got the presentation code on there. I know you guys have to, or you can, please. I'd love your feedback. But while we're doing that, does anybody have any questions? Yes? Oh, thank you. So that was a comment. She just said thank you very much. So thank you. Thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome. Other questions?
So you're definitely not going to change the trajectory for which many of us look at incidents. What do you think Boston did after? Because we both were talking about it. You're right. I don't think we ever heard about the witness rate. Everybody was so focused on everybody else. So did you ever look to see what was offered, if anything?
So the question is, did I ever look and find if there were things offered to people without physical injuries? And yes, so there were things offered. You had to know how to find them. And that's part of the challenge. If you don't know that something's wrong with you, or you don't realize that what you're experiencing is a real thing, you might not seek out help. I got help from the Red Cross. So thank you, Red Cross. They directed me to the Massachusetts Office of Victim Assistance. Now, I didn't think of myself as a victim of this crime. I didn't realize that. And even if I had, I never knew there was such a thing as an Office of Victim Assistance. And I know many survivors who it took them years to find the services because they didn't just, I happened to get clued in because I talked to the Red Cross. So the mental health community marshaled their services and were available. People didn't know they were available. Yeah. Yes? Right, so the question is, what's the pragmatic, realistic, sort of on-the-ground way that we can offer this kind of help? And it is a larger conversation than this room. I don't 100% know the answer partly because I am a civilian. I don't necessarily know how things work from behind, from behind the scenes. But from my perspective, what's just really important is that anybody who knows about this is talking about it, and we're bringing it up. The next time something happens, we're remembering, the survivors of the other thing that happened. So that each time one of these things happen, we kind of bring up, let's not forget the psychological wounds. And if you follow me on Twitter, a lot of times when something big happens, I post not, I'm sorry this happened, but here's some resources where if you need help, here's, if you experience this, you might want to talk to the Center for PTSD, you might want to call SAMHSA, you might want to do all of these things. I think that it's a multi-pronged problem. It isn't just the media, it isn't just our civic leaders talking about it, it's kind of finding a way so that we're all talking about it. So I know that's not a good answer.
But using media and using public information officers to help get that message out there. We've gotten better at the issue of suicide.
Yes.
If there's a suicide, and at least the media that I've worked with, sometimes not only will report that, but also report the crisis line number, and if you're feeling sad or depressed or whatever, so that there's a solution along with.
Right. Right, so, using the media and public information officers, and the key that you said there is education. I think, and we're doing it, it's just slow because we're fighting against a pretty big tide in the other direction. But it is, I think education is key. And so I think that we're out of time, because you're starting at 11:50, right? Okay, well, I'm going to stop talking right now then. I will be out in the hallway for a little bit if anyone has comments or additional questions, but thank you so much for your attention.